the summer of 2001, and we had a couple restaurants right on Madison Square Park. I'm primarily in the full service restaurant business. One of them was called 11 Madison Park, which later went on to be top restaurant in the world. And one was called Tabla, which was an Indian restaurant, 3-star New York Times restaurant. We were looking out onto Madison Square Park, and I said, this park needs to be a lot more beautiful. What can we do to make it, raise some money and restore it to its grandeur from the last century? And we said, we need art in the park. And so what we did was we went out and we curated the best sculptor we could find, who happened to be from Thailand. This promises story is going somewhere. His piece of art was called I Love Taxi. And he had 4 taxi cabs up on stilts, and he wanted to have a working hot dog cart to go with it because he wanted to make a statement that everyone in the world has either been able to afford to be driven in a taxi or had to be the guy driving it. Everyone else in the world either was the person who could afford to buy a hot dog or had to be the guy selling it. So he needed someone to operate the hot dog cart. We said, we'll do it. That we operate this hot dog cart as a piece of his art. The lines would be 100 people long, covered by every major TV station. And so we did it in the next year, 2002. The art was down, but the community wanted it back.
Just a pop-up hot dog stand.
Just a pop. We did it again in 2003. And in 2004, I really persuaded the city to allow us to actually build a permanent shack right in the middle of Madison Square Park. We built it, we funded it, and we said, here's a new model. We'll own the business. We're going to call it Shake Shack. You will be the landlord, and a percentage of every sale will go back into the park. It never dawned on me that it would become a chain. Never dawned on me that it would become a public company. Never dawned on me I'd be sitting in Dubai talking about it 20 years later. But that one shack, that first Shake Shack, generates close to $1 million in rent every year for Madison Square Park. So it's been a self-sustaining model for the park, and we got a nice business out of it.
You did all right, didn't you? Because 10 years ago, you listed the company on the stock market, and you were back there on Monday for the 10th anniversary, listening to this sound. The New York Stock Exchange bell. Monday, 10 years as a listed company.
Yeah, it was a thrilling moment. And, it's one of these things where all my friends said, can you believe it's been 10 years? How does it feel? And I said, well, in some ways it feels like just yesterday. And in some ways it feels like about 30 years ago. We've all aged. I saw some pictures of myself. I had pretty dark hair 10 years ago.
Which is not the case today, with love and respect. But it's not all been plain sailing, has it? $120 a share pretty much at the moment. But I'm looking 5 years ago in COVID, April 2020, down at $29-30 a share. The restaurant industry in crisis. How do you describe that moment?
Yeah, it was tough all the way around. Our full service restaurants in New York City, like Gramercy Tavern, Union Square Cafe, The Modern, we had to close for almost 5 months. We were legally not allowed to open our doors, and we had to lay off about 90% of our staff, which was incredibly hard, and remake our company. Shake Shack was able to get open almost immediately because Shake Shack's model permitted it to have curbside service. So we didn't have to have people come into the restaurants. And I really take my hat off to the team at Shake Shack because they were so resilient in the face of this. And they started serving first responders. They started serving people in the hospitals. And it's the proudest I am of Shake Shack is that it's a community-based business. And they've come back. But you're right. The stock was in the dumper, the business was in the dumper, and just feel really grateful that we've been able to come back.
Right, $5 billion business. You've got more than 40 restaurants across the Middle East. I think 15 the last count here in the UAE. I've probably been to most of them. My kids certainly have. How do you differentiate a business? I go there often. You sell burgers, you sell hot dogs, you sell fries, you sell milkshakes. They're very good. My kids love them. But they're not massively differentiated products. You're aware of this, so go on.
Well, I don't think burgers are anything that we invented. We won't be the first and we won't be the last. There's going to be burgers and shakes and good fries forever. And we know that. And so I think to answer your question, what we've been aware of since day one is that long after you forget what you tasted, you're going to remember how a place made you feel. And we really, really focus on hospitality. That's been part of our culture since day one. And I've got to say that in partnering with Alshaya all those years ago, we could not have picked a partner who better understands the power of hospitality to really drive business. We learned, I just have to share that when we signed a deal with Alshaya to bring Shake Shack to the Middle East, believe it or not, we had 3.5 Shake Shacks open. That's it. We didn't know how to replicate or scale. We had no
in
experience.
America.
In America, and
What date was this?
I'm gonna say this was probably about 14 years ago, but I'm not great with dates right now. But what I'll tell you is that we said this is very unusual because mostly American companies come abroad only after they've oversaturated in the United States. We said we know what we don't know. Remember, I come from a fine dining restaurant. We had never done anything more than once. And we said, what if we could actually learn from one of the world's greatest scaling companies, Alshaya, how to do something that we can then use some of those lessons back home. And we've learned at least as much from Alshaya as they have from us.
So Alshaya taught you effectively how to scale Shake Shack, and now you 1,500 restaurants in the US?
Well, we've said that we want to have 1,500 in the US. At this point, we have about 400. We have about 400 in the United States right now. When we went public 10 years ago, we laid down a chip and we said there will be 450 Shake Shacks. There's already 400 right now. Just earlier this month, our CEO Rob Lynch announced that we have a new addressable market, which is going to be 1,500, and he's got a great plan to bring the team to that level.
But very quickly, just before we take a quick break, looking at his comments when your latest earnings came out, he said inflation's an issue. Wage inflation, the price of beef, everything is an issue. 30 seconds on that.
The only thing I can say for 30 seconds is we love when there are challenges that every single business faces, because as long as everyone's facing the same challenges, we think that our team and we think that hospitality will prevail.
So we got more questions. So there's myself, Richard, and my colleague Brandy Scott to my right, my colleague Tom Urquhart to the left. Tom, in a couple of minutes, is keen to talk about your fine dining business because he's our resident bon viveur. We'll get to that, and that's how you started your career. We'll get to that in a second. Brandy Scott to my right wants to talk about chips.
Yeah, always bringing the tone down. We spoke to one of your colleagues quite a while ago. It was right at the beginning, I would say, of the delivery revolution. And we talked about delivering, and he said, look, it's tricky for us because chips are tricky to deliver. Chips are tricky to keep the heat, the consistency, and the outside crispiness correct. Have you solved the problem?
I think we do the best job we can. I think one of the facts of both pizza and chips is that they don't retain their heat, and if they do retain their heat, they tend to lose their crispness. There's almost nothing you can do to make a chip taste anywhere nearly as good as it does right out of the fryer. And so what you need to do is go to your local Shake Shack and eat it there and enjoy the experience of being in the restaurant. That said, as long as people want chips, we're going to make chips wherever they want to have them. And I've always said that, by the way, we call them French fries, so I'm doing the best job I can to say chips right here. But I would say that the most underrated reason for the value of any burger chain are the French fries. And the reason is that people never make French fries in their own home. They'll make burgers, but they never make French fries. And so if you ever want to know how well a place is doing, look at how well their French fries are doing.
You mentioned eating them in the restaurant instead, which is the other point I wanted to ask about. I mean, given what we have seen with the explosion of delivery, has it changed the size of the restaurants you open or the way they lay them out?
Absolutely. Two things that have changed the size and layout of our restaurants are delivery and drive-through. Drive-through is something that we never did really until about 5 years ago. And actually, another great thing that we've learned from our work with Alshaya, they're doing fantastic work here in the Middle East with drive-throughs. There's one that I saw yesterday right here in Dubai that is just doing an incredible amount of business. We're learning how to do it for the first time. I made the mistake as a young restaurateur when I first started Shake Shack of saying we will never have drive-through. because Shake Shack is all about being your community gathering place. And we were so focused on the guest experience of being there. I said, why would we want something that's not about being here? It's about, getting up and leaving. And at the end of the day, I'm happy to be wrong, because if people want the convenience of staying in their car, that's what they're going to get. Now, part of the reason for my mistake was that the first 20 shacks we had were all in New York City, which is not an automobile culture. But as we went further away from New York, especially into suburbs, we've learned our lesson.
Let's talk about tipping. You have strong thoughts on it. You say you're quite happy for people not to tip at all. It's a big issue. Just explain your point as briefly as you can.
Yeah. I'm not happy for people not to tip at all in a tipping restaurant. I think that that's a big mistake, because in a tipping restaurant, what that tells you is that the people in the front of the house are making the primary part of their living based on tips. So just to be clear, when we eliminated tipping, which was a 6-year experiment, which we ended during the pandemic, but when we eliminated it was because in the United States and especially in New York, it's not legal for cooks to share in the tips. And what I had seen year after year after year was that our waiters, happy for them, were making more and more money, because a tip is nothing more than a multiplier of increasing menu prices. But meanwhile, the cook's compensation remained stagnant. And it was a really bad morale issue for our team that, it would be like on a football team where the offense was making 3 times as much money as the defense. It just doesn't feel very, very good. So we eliminated tipping and paid everybody based on merit. When we returned to tipping, which we needed to do during the pandemic because we couldn't get staff anywhere for quite a while, we did something different. We now, in addition to permitting tipping in our restaurants, we actually pay a percentage of our revenue to all of the non-tip eligible workers. So when we have a cranking busy Friday or Saturday night, instead of the cooks watching the waiters counting their tips and all they got to do is perspire more, the cooks actually make more money because they're getting a percentage of sales. So we're happy with where things ended up. But if I'm in a tipping restaurant, I'm a very good tipper, because the person who took care of me may want to come apply to work for us for a job the next day.
Let's talk about your fine dining business. My colleague Tom Urquhart is the expert on that.
I'm not sure if I'm an expert, certainly a keen observer, but I couldn't ask for a better voice of reason on this one. I've just come back from London. I know that you spent a lot of time in London as well, Danny. Fine dining is part of the infrastructure of the London dining scene, and yet recently, especially post-COVID, it's suffering. It's suffering really bad. You talk to a lot of the top-rated chefs, and they talk about the struggles that they're facing. Giorgio Locatelli had to close his restaurant just a couple of weeks ago. I've just come back from London. I'm not seeing queues outside fine dining restaurants. I am seeing queues for food trucks, for artisan bakers, for people doing things a little bit differently as well. Is the food scene changing at the moment? Is a good burger and chips as good as fine dining, or am I getting this one wrong?
No, a good burger and chips is a great burger and great chips, period. But I do believe that there's always going to be a market for fine dining. Look, you're right. I love London. I was just there about a week and a half ago. We had a tough time getting reservations at many of the full-service restaurants and fine dining restaurants that we went to. I do know a number of London restaurateurs expressed a lot of dismay after Brexit, because they said it was tougher for them to be able to hire people, obviously, from all over the Eurozone. And there's a lot of people in Great Britain who just did not want to go back and work in restaurants. So that part has been a big challenge for them. But the quality of the cooking, London used to be the laughingstock gastronomically of the world. It used to be like, oh my gosh, what are you going to get, mushy peas and Scotch eggs? Well, guess what? I go to pubs sometimes throughout Great Britain, and I'll tell you what, I'll eat some of those mushy peas any day. They're so good. But seriously, the amount of innovation in London is staggering. And I go there to get ideas to bring back to New York.
Do you see that innovation and the opportunity of that innovation here in Dubai?
I've not been to Dubai for many years, so what I'll tell you is last night when I got here, went immediately to JBR to go out and have dinner. I could not believe the amount of energy here, and I'm excited to get to learn all about it. We'll be here for a few days, and our team from Alshaya knows all the good places